Welcome to Daily Steps from One Extraordinary Marriage, where we outline simple steps that you can take to have the ultimate marriage adventure. I'm Tony DeLorenzo, your co-host, along with my beautiful wife, Elisa. In today's show, we answer the question, how do I talk to my kids about sex?
This person goes on to say, I have a hard time talking to my spouse, let alone my kids, about sex. What does that sound like? What does that look like? And I just want to, as we jump into this episode, I just want to give a few stats. If you're like, well, I don't really need to talk about this, they'll all just figure it out.
Don't talk about it.
A 2009 CDC study report found that 39% of all sexually active U.S. high school students did not use a condom the last time they had intercourse. Please be talking to your kids about sex. 6% of all U.S. high school students have had sexual intercourse before the age of 13. You need to be talking to your kids. Right? And one other quick stat is that in 2010, 80% of young adults surveyed between the ages of 18 and 24 did not consider oral sex to be sex. And yet, you can get sexually transmitted diseases from oral sex. So I think we need to open up the conversation. And I'm glad that this person said that it's hard for them to even talk to their spouse. Because absolutely, that's the first place where these skills, where this conversation gets started. It's the two of you being able to talk about your own sexual intimacy and be able to talk about sex and be able to talk about all of these different components. And for those of you that need a resource, I'm going to tell you, check out our 19 questions to amazing sex with your spouse. Like, use a guide to walk you through that, right? It doesn't have to just be like, I know we need to talk about it, but I don't know what to talk about. Go to oneextraordinarymarriage.com/19 questions.
And that's for you and your spouse.
That's the conversation between the two of you. And know also that it's going to be different conversations at different times.
It sure is. And depending on the age of your kid, you want to keep it age appropriate on what you're saying and what you're sharing, so that, there are different times and different steps when you're going to be talking about sex in a different way, depending on what age they are, from 6 to 18 or even older. You may be discussing these things with them.
And let me tell you that the conversations with your kids about sex are not single, one time, never happen again, whew, I'm done conversations. First of all, your kids live in a world based on those statistics, and those statistics some of them are almost 10 years old, right? And those numbers have only gotten larger, right? Because of the access that kids have to social media, the conversations that they're having on the playground. If you're not talking to your kids about sex, I will tell you, we had a conversation with our middle schooler last night, and she's like, oh, people are talking about it all over the school. So if you're not talking about it, I want you parents all to think about this. Where are my kids getting their information?
Right.
Do you want Instagram to be the loudest voice about sexual intimacy for your children? Do you want what they can access on Netflix or YouTube or wherever they've got access to be how they get their information on what sexual intimacy looks like and what they think is normal?
Yeah, and it was interesting because we brought this up to our middle schooler and sharing with her that in 2019, we're going to be doing a number of live events. And we thought one session would be very interesting to have her up there with us, talking about that. What does that look like? And sharing how that conversation goes. Because even last night, we had this interesting conversation as we were talking about the vagina, their urethra, where they're at. So like the anatomy of the vagina lips, and all this sort of stuff. And granted, there was a point where she's just like, enough, you guys. And it was like, okay, we're done. And Elisa and I sort of kept the conversation going a little bit because she and I were in this place of trying to be clear and specific with one another, but we didn't have to bring her in that conversation anymore. We just said, all right, that's fine. You're good.
And that actually brings up an excellent point. Please use the anatomically correct names for body parts. It's not a vajayjay. It's not Mr. Happy. It's not, whatever other possible. Your kids need to know what things are called, because not everybody else in the world, their doctors, whomever they're talking to about sexual issues, like, just equip them. It's very empowering for them to just be very matter of fact about, well, yeah, this is my body and this is what it is. And, plain and simple.
We have a number of books that you can check out on our Amazon shop. So if you want to go to oneextraordinarymarriage.com/Amazon shop, go to the bottom. That's where all our book resources are. We have a number of books there on being able to talk to your kids, age-appropriate books on sex.
And let's face it, sometimes kids are going to ask you those questions that completely catch you off guard, or they're going to ask you questions at a time when you're like, wow, this is not the time to be talking about that. And so in those places, there are a couple of things that you can do to just empower yourself. One is to acknowledge, you know what, hun, that's a great question. And I want to be able to answer it, but let's talk about this at home or when we're driving in the car or somewhere that just offers you privacy. It's kind of like when we talk about, husband and wife talking about sexual intimacy, there are just times and locations where it makes sense. Here's the thing though, if you tell them that you're going to talk about it at a future time,
do so.
They're waiting, right? And the other part too is if you don't know where that question's coming from, ask them. Say, that's a great question. What made you think of that? Find out what they're thinking, because you may already have, they may say something to you and you're like, oh, what do they want to know? And you start shaking and sweating and, you're like having this panic attack because you're taking it down to step 10 and they're really at step 1. They're like, well, somebody on the playground said this. What does that mean? Just a quick story around that. When our daughter was in 2nd grade, she comes home one day and she's like, I know what sex is. And I'm like, well, okay. What'd you find out today? What was going on? And basically, these kids were talking about it on the playground. And the definition that they were going with is when a man and a woman get in bed and get under the covers and are kissing. Now, this is 2nd grade. And so all I did was reframe that for her, age appropriate at that point in time, and say, you know what? Close. It's a husband and a wife. Because for us, we frame sexual intimacy within the context of marriage for our kids. But that's where you take what they're learning instead of getting all worked up about the fact that, oh my gosh, they know what the word sex is. No, just frame it for where they are. Be clear on what the two of you want to convey, and then be open to opportunities to be the very first point of information for your kids on sexual intimacy.
For more information on this topic, check out oneextraordinarymarriage.com/427.